Hello there and welcome to another Hero Arts video. It's Michelle Short here, and today I have a card to share with you using partial die cutting and embossing with stencils. So let's get started. I have first cut a circle using the Circle Infinity die set from Paradise Cardstock, and I'm going to add some ink blending and embossing on top using the Sweater Pattern Stencil. So first I'm going to emboss it into the cardstock so that I get a really nice impression with it. I'm using the Platinum 6 here. I'm starting off with the platform base, the platform top, the embossing pad, and then the cardstock, and then I've got the stencil on top. The great thing about having it on a circle is that it doesn't matter if it's straight, but I do just want to make sure that the stencil isn't kind of hanging out from the sides of the plates. And then I'm taking a piece of scrap printer paper here. This isn't necessary, but I just prefer to have it there. And then I'm also adding the adapter plate D on top. And then I'm going to run it through the Platinum 6. I am doing it quite slowly here. That purely is just so that my camera doesn't jiggle too much and you can see it go through the whole way. But you could obviously do it a lot quicker than that if you wanted to with embossing. So I'm trying my best to kind of keep these two pieces together because I want to add ink blending on top. Now it doesn't really matter, and in the end they didn't actually stick together, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place the stencil back over the panel, and because it's embossed, the stencil kind of goes back over it quite easily. It kind of pushes back in place. So I've stuck that down with some low tack tape, and then I'm going to add some ink blending on top. So I'm starting off with Aquatic core ink, and I'm using a large ink blending brush, and I'm just going mainly around the outside edges. That's where I want the darkest concentration of the colour to be. I'm holding the stencil down with my other hand, but to be honest, I'm not too concerned if it moves too much because I am actually going to remove the stencil and then add ink blending on top. But adding it this way to start with, I think just kind of intensifies the pattern of the stencil a little bit more. So that's why I wanted to do it with the stencil in place as well. So once I've added that layer down, I'm then going to go in with Nautical, and I'm just going to go around the outside edges. I'm trying to leave the inside portion of the cardstock lighter. That's why I decided to use Paradise cardstock rather than white cardstock, so that I didn't actually have to do so much ink blending. If you start off with kind of like a lighter colour of the ink blending that you want to have on top, then it kind of stops you doing so much ink blending, because if I did white I would then have to add like a aqua colour in the middle and then go through all of the colours again. So it's quite a good trick to kind of not do so much ink blending. So I do think that that looks quite pretty, but I don't want it so sort of in your face, if that makes sense. I want to kind of dampen it down a little bit, and actually funnily enough, even with the ink blending on top, you still see that pattern really nicely, and actually if anything I think it enhances it a little bit more. So I'm going back in with that Aquatic ink, and then I'm going to go in with the Nautical ink as well, just to really darken up those edges, and I automatically get that lovely highlight in the middle. So just finishing off that ink blending there, and you can see that you've got a nice subtle detail from the raised embossing. I really love embossing with stencils. I'm then going to work on the penguin. So this is the small penguin tag fancy die, and as you can see it's got a hole in the top because it is made to be used as a tag. But I don't want to have it as a tag for my card, I want it just as a penguin. So I'm going to do some partial die cutting. I'm placing it down onto a piece of pitch black cardstock, holding it in place with some low tack tape. And then when I run it through my die cutting machine, I'm going to have it so that it only cuts the bottom part of the penguin. Ordinarily with the compact cutter you would cut upwards, but in this instance I'm going to cut downwards, and I don't think it really matters too much. So I'm going to place my top plate over the bottom part of the die, so anything that's underneath where that plate is going to cut, and anything on the other side isn't going to cut. Now I apologize that my hands keep getting in the way here. I'm trying to move them so you can see it running through the machine, but unfortunately my compact cutter doesn't stick to my mat very well. So it just kind of jiggled around a little bit. But as you can see here, once I remove this die from the cardstock, it's just cut the bottom part of that penguin, and then I can take some scissors and I can just cut that top part down. I'm just going to eyeball it to see where it would be, kind of matching those two sides together. But if you wanted to be a little bit more accurate, you could either draw it with a pencil first, or you could use the actual die cut if you were to cut it normally with the piece on top, and use that kind of as a guide. But I think this was quite easy, just to kind of bridge those two gaps together. So I've got my little penguin here, and I've also cut it again from Deluxe smooth white cardstock, and then also from Papaya cardstock. So I'm taking this piece here, and again I'm just cutting the outside edges off first, and then I'm going to just cut a tiny little bit just in between those areas. And it's quite easy to do because the majority of it is cut, but the little pieces kind of hold it in place. So if you didn't actually want to kind of lay them on top of each other, you wouldn't necessarily have to. You could do this, you could add colour with ink blending, you could add colour with markers or anything like that, but I quite like to do this kind of paper piecing. So I've added some precision glue onto the back of this piece. My glue is really runny at the moment, so I'm just taking off the excess glue by pressing it down onto my scrap piece of paper here. And then I'm going to do the same thing for his beak with that Papaya cardstock. So while I was looking up penguins, I found that actually it really is only kind of like the bottom part of the beak that is kind of yellow or orange, but I wasn't sure how that would look, so I decided to just do the whole thing in the orange colour. So I'm just dabbing that onto that bit of glue that's on my paper already, so I didn't actually have to add any extra onto the back, which was quite helpful. And then I'm just using the tweezers here just to help me put that in place. And then for the eyes, you could inlay them quite easily, but I decided actually to just stick a little bit of black cardstock onto the back, and I don't think it matters too much that they're not inlaid, but you could definitely do that if you wanted to with this little penguin. Next, I've cut two larger circles using the circle infinity dies, and on one I've just cut a little bit off of the bottom, and then I've butt that up in my scoring board, and I'm just making a score line towards the top. This is going to create a hinge so that I can make myself a circle card base, and the bit at the bottom is just going to help so that it stands up nicely. So I've added some double-sided tape onto the top of that hinge portion, and then I'm going to line it up so this piece here would be the front card base, and the bit where it's cut off is the back. So just making sure that they're really well lined up before I press that down. So I'm just checking from the front and the back to make sure that they're lined up perfectly. And then I can really make sure that that adhesive is really well stuck down and that the hinge is going to work quite nicely. So it's going to open from the front, and then it's also going to stand up really nicely as well. I then have a sentiment from the Holiday Sentiment Strips set, which has been cut using the Sentiment Strips Fancy dies. This is what Dana used in her video last week, so I'm not going to show how I did it, but you can see here that I've got lots in a box that I keep spare, ready for cards so that I don't have to remake them. For my card base here, I'm just adhering it down with some low-tack tape using the grid lines on my mat so that I can make sure that anything that I add on top is going to be straight. I've added some thin foam tape onto the back of the embossed stenciled panel, and I'm just going to adhere it down onto the card base, just kind of popping it in place to start with, and then using a scrap piece of paper just to really press that down. And then I've added some thin foam tape onto the back of the penguin, and then I can add him on top. I just think he's so cute. And then I've cut my sentiments down so that they're in 2 separate strips, and I've added some thin foam tape onto the word sending, and I'm just popping that down in place. And then I'm adding some thin foam tape and also some tape runner adhesive onto the holiday cheer portion so that it can overlap the penguin and not be any higher. So just getting that in place with the tweezers, and then I can press that down once I'm happy. And then to finish off, I'm just going to add a few embellishments. So these are white enamel dots from the Neutrals Hero Hues set. And I'm just going to add a few around the sentiment strips. So I like to add my sentiment strips quite often with foam tape so that I've got a little bit of room so that I can pop some embellishments underneath. I just find that quite a nice look. So I'm just taking some of the enamel dots, popping them underneath the sentiment strips, and then I can just add another one up here as well. And then just really pressing them down, make sure that they're adhered nicely. And so that is the card finished for today. I really like that it's a circle card. I think it's something a little bit different. It stands up really nicely. And I really like enhancing that stenciling by embossing it first and then adding the ink blending on top. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Hero Arts blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.